Well, hello everybody. My name is Dovilė Budrytė, and I am the current editor-in-chief of Lituanus. I would like to welcome everyone to this webinar, and this online webinar will focus on the role of the museums in shaping cultural memory and identity within the historically complex Vilnius region. We will discuss article which was recently published in Lituanus, published in the most recent issue of Lituanus. Let me show you that particular issue, what it looks like. So I hope you can see it. This is the most recent issue of Lituanus. So during this webinar, we are celebrating the birth of this issue. And I would also like to mention some of the team members who are in the audience. So this issue would not have been possible without the associate editor, Vyšniauskaitė. And I'm also very happy to welcome a new team. Rasickaitė will serve as the new associate editor, and Charles Perrin will be the new assistant editor. So very happy and very grateful to my team who worked very hard to publish this issue. And again, this webinar will focus on the first article, From Monologue to Dialogues, Museums, Memory and Identity in the Vilnius region. So the article will also be available through open access. Briefly, you will all be able to read it, and many of our issues, Lituanus issues, in fact, all of our Lituanus issues, except the most recent 3 issues, are available through spauda.org. And of course, one of the goals of this webinar is to attract as many people as possible to our journal, and we hope that you subscribe to it. And also you can access, as I mentioned before, our previous issues through spauda.org, through Lituanus website. And the article that we will discuss today will be available open access from our website also, hopefully very, very briefly. So I'm going to start talking a little bit about Lituanus, about the history of this journal, about my own vision for Lituanus, and then we will continue with a discussion of the project, Europass project that this article was part of, and also the article itself. Before I start, I'm very happy to see Edita Buzėnienė in the audience. She leads the American Lithuanian community, and our journal Lituanus is obviously part of American Lithuanian community as well. So let me talk a little bit about the history of Lituanus. And if you'd like to know more, I would also like to recommend an article by Dovilė Latvytė published in 2024 winter issue of Lituanus. It's a great short article with the main facts about Lituanus history, and I used it to prepare a little bit for this introductory talk, but also there are other essays about Lituanus in various encyclopedias as well. So the journal was born a long time ago. It was born in 1954, and last year it celebrated its 70th anniversary. The journal was started by the Lithuanian Student Association, which consisted of young Lithuanians who left Lithuania, or rather were forced to leave Lithuania after World War II, and who were living in DP, the so-called DP camps, or displaced people camps in Germany. Vytautas Vygantas, who was a doctoral student at the University of Illinois, could be considered the father of Lituanus. For a long time, he took care of organizational matters and the publication of the journal, which in the beginning was more like a bulletin. It was only 12 pages long, and it had as its goal to introduce the Lithuanian culture, the Lithuanian history, the Lithuanian politics to Americans primarily, right? This was obviously the Cold War, so it was very, very important to get out historical truth, get out the truth about the situation in Lithuania to the broader public. So in the beginning, it had the circulation of about 1,000, and that number grew very fast. And the goal of the bulletin was also to introduce new interesting historical facts. So it had a section, Did You Know? And in that section, they presented various facts of great interest, for example, about common Lithuanian Polish Commonwealth and other interesting facts, not just from the recent times, but also even going as far as Middle Ages. So from the beginning, the goal of Lituanus was to make sure that it's widely read and widely available in the academic settings and the libraries. And even though in the beginning it was not written for the Lithuanian diaspora, Lithuanian American diaspora, it was heavily dependent on financing by the Lithuanian American diaspora. And in 1963, a nonprofit Lituanus Foundation was created to oversee this quarterly, and this foundation is alive and well today, and it oversees the publishing of the journal today. So let me just briefly tell about a major change in the identity of Lituanus, which happened about 10 years after it was born. So specifically in 1964, Dr. Tomas Remeikis, who became a new editor of Lituanus, decided that it's extremely important that Lituanus becomes an academic publication and publishes top-notch articles of very high quality. This meant a major change. The length of Lituanus expanded. It became from 70 until 100 pages, and it became very, very popular. The circulation was as high as 7,000 copies in 1965, and this was indeed the heyday of the journal. Very famous authors published in the journal. So let me just mention several very well-known names, such as Tomas Venclova, Algirdas Landsbergis, Jonas Mekas, and many others. And it was a great honor to be published in this journal at that time. And it was very widely read. And it's important to note that also one of famous Lithuanian authors, Rimvydas Šilbajoris, proposed that Lituanus should be actively contributing to the creation of Lithuanian culture and not just reflect it. And by doing that, Lituanus became once again very important for Lithuanians living in diaspora, primarily in the United States, but also elsewhere as well. My first encounter with Lituanus was in 2010 when editor Violeta Davoliūtė invited me to contribute an article on Lithuanian women fighting in the partisan war. And the article was published in 2011. I was very happy about it. And when I became the editor in 2025, this journal has already been firmly established as an academic journal with a focus on history, culture, politics, and literature, but which also published creative essays and art. So when I articulated my vision for the journal, I promised to make sure that it maintains its identity as an academic journal. But at the same time, I really like the fact that one of the characteristics of Lituanus would be to present the material in an accessible and inclusive way. So I believe that indeed Lituanus should be both scholarly and accessible to the readers and interesting to the readers. It's possible to produce good scholarship, which is also interesting to read at the same time, because in many cases, you have several people reading the article, but with Lituanus, we hope to reach a broader audience, and that's probably why we're doing this webinar as well. So also, I was very much hoping that Lituanus will inspire new dialogues about the work published in Lituanus, and that's what we are doing today as well. I was very happy to see the essay by Violeta and others published in Lituanus, because to me, it definitely shows that it's possible to produce scholarship which is very, very good, very high quality, but also very, very interesting to broader number of people. And that's why we're featuring this article in our webinar today. So I'll stop right here. Now I'd like to introduce the participants of the webinar. So we will start with Professor Dr. Violeta Davoliūtė, who led a massive, huge project, Europast project, which focused on public history and memory politics at Vilnius University. And I was very happy to be part of the project too, and that's how I learned about this interesting research. Dr. Davoliūtė is also a senior researcher at the Lithuanian History Institute, and she has published very extensively on memory politics and similar topics. I would also like to introduce Rūta Vyšniauskaitė, who is a PhD candidate at the Institute of International Relations and Political Science at Vilnius University. Ignė Rasickaitė, who's currently pursuing her PhD studies at the Faculty of History of Vilnius University in Lithuania. She's also a researcher at the Martynas Mažvydas National Library in Lithuania. And last but not least, we will also hear from Neringa Latvytė. She's a historian, lecturer at the Faculty of Communication of Vilnius University, and also has years of doing research on the Holocaust in Lithuania. So thank you so much. And right now, I will give the floor to Dr. Violeta Davoliūtė, who will talk a little bit about the Europast and the project itself. So Violeta, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. First of all, it's a great pleasure to see all of you, including some familiar faces. I know that for some it's Friday night, so I'm very impressed that people found the time to join us. I'm also truly grateful to Dovilė for coming up with this idea and really inspiring us to organize it. So we will share a few slides, and so this will facilitate my interjection. I will very briefly introduce the project, and then I will introduce the research that we've done. That and the outcome, the first outcome, is this article that we are talking about today. So basically, the project that we're talking about, the full title is Facing the Past: Public History of a Stronger Europe. It was Horizon Europe project. Those of you who are not familiar with the funding, it's basically it's European Union funding through different structures. So this one was. This particular funding scheme is intended for the academic institution of the semi-new member states that are considered to be not so strong yet to team up with the institutions that are quite well established in the European context and beyond, and then to truly strengthen our capacities to be competitive in the academic field and so on. So the project, as you see, took place from 2022 to basically 2026. It's just ended, and the consortium was Luxembourg Center for Contemporary and Digital History, then Leibniz Center for Contemporary History in Germany, Potsdam, and Lund University in Sweden. And we are quite happy that we are the leaders, Vilnius University and our institute, and myself, we led this consortium, and it was a great group of scholars. Then the aim of the project was to basically promote public history research and enhance, as I said, it's a twofold goal, basically. On the one hand, it's, as I said, first of all, to strengthen Vilnius University. We led the project, but we also we're most interested in strengthening the capacity and the competitiveness of Vilnius University. And so the capabilities of researchers from not only Vilnius University, but also consortium institutions to create opportunities for young scholars. So a lot of our activities was geared towards really grooming and supporting young scholars. And so you will hear from young scholars during this, or emerging scholars rather, that's probably more accurate term. Emerging scholars, PhD students, so you will hear from them during this webinar. And also to promote the public history in Lithuanian context, because very often people do we have people who do public history, but do not call it public history. So we wanted to look closer into this area of theory and practice, and to, as I said, learn from best practices and so on. So research comprised 30% of the entire project. And so when we had to choose what to focus on, it was quite clear to us that we will focus on the Vilnius region, so the representation of the Vilnius region, multi-ethnic history in memory institutions. That's what we focused on. And so in the end, we collected over 30 interviews across 20 sites and communities. And these interviews were placed in open access data sets. So also findings were shared through stakeholder workshops, publications, and even some policy decisions. Now, this article that Dovilė mentioned and that we're talking about is, as I said, one of the outcomes. It's a publication. It's just we hope to develop this. And one team member here, Rūta Vyšniauskaitė, we will hear from her. She started her PhD thesis precisely focusing on this area. But let me elaborate a little bit why this area, what's interesting or significant about Vilnius area or Vilnia. Maybe we can get along. Vilnius region rather, not area, sorry. So thinking about historical legacy of the Vilnius region, or Vilnia, Wileńszczyzna in Polish, it is that it's really defined by its status as a historically contested borderland, where shifting political control and the traumas, many traumas, Holocaust, but also Soviet occupation, then also mass population displacement. And here we have to think about the displacement of Poles from the territory into the territory of Poland right after World War II. There were several waves of such displacement, really erased, and other also very rapid and forceful Sovietization in this area. All of these processes actually erased much of its original multi-ethnic diversity. So this legacy to this day creates friction for contemporary minorities, for modern minorities who must reconcile their specific and cultural or ethnic identities with the nationalizing narratives that really prevail since the restoration of independence. I also have to point out that this area is not very well known to people who actually live in Vilnius. Think about it. It's very close to the capital. It's the Vilnius region. But as several scholars already pointed out, very often Lithuanians, quote unquote, ordinary Lithuanians, know more about the resorts in Turkey or, I don't know, Latvia than about this particular area. In many ways, it's a terra incognita. And also sometimes this particular region is even looked at with a certain suspicion that the people who live there, they have this dual loyalty. They're not fully loyal to possibly not fully loyal to the Lithuanian state and whatnot. In other words, it's an area, as I said, is treated with a certain suspicion, if you will. It's remembered before the elections. Sometimes in the media, you also hear that this considers a certain threat to a Lithuanian state, and so on. Not everybody, expresses such opinions, but you definitely hear this. And so we thought, okay, it is very important then to look how the communities there look at their past, at their identity, and also to survey how the current regional museums are dealing with this challenge of this very complicated past, how they are evolving to address this complexity, and how they transition perhaps from this narrow, more single perspective storytelling towards more inclusive dialogues that acknowledge this kind of multi-layered regional histories. So we thought, first of all, to see, okay, what is the state of the art? What museums are there? Who are they integrated in the communities? What are the public history practices there? And so on. So if we go to the next slide, I will quickly wrap up, and then I will give the floor to our emerging researchers who actually did most of the research on the ground. So I think it's quite important to point out that even in the scholarly community, this area was not really discovered, so to say. I mean, there are researchers who published on some aspects of Vilnius region. So first of all, here one should mention research that was done by the Institute of Ethnic Studies, scholars like Kristina Šlevaitė and others. Also, Simonas Tiškevičius published an article in Journal of Baltic Studies. Rasickaitė, I think in 2012 or 2011, if I'm not mistaken, published an article about this very interesting town of Visaginas, former Sniečkus. But in general, it is really under-researched. Recently, it also attracted some international attention. There are very interesting, very prominent, actually, Estonian researchers who focused on the representation of Russian-speaking migrants in the past and in the present day. And I'm talking about Ene Kürsaar and Kersti Josilo, two scholars from Estonia, and they did some research on Lithuania as well. But generally, as I said, even in the scholarly community, it's strongly underrepresented. So then what happened was our young researchers just basically took cars or other a car or other forms of transportation, and basically having discovered, even the smallest museums in the area, just went there and just visited to see, what do we have there? What do these museums look like? And so without any further ado, I will give the floor now to my research team to say a few words about what they discovered.
Yes, so I will continue. Also, I want to say thank you for Violeta, yes, for being invited to join this event, and also thank you for my colleagues that yes, also we were doing this research, we completed this research. And so actually, if to talk about, because Violeta already mentioned, yes, about what we can find, what kind of representations we can find on the local museums landscape. Yeah, so actually, and what are these museums there in this, region? So it was possible to identify 5 main, museums, so local history, kraštotyra museums, memorial museums, school museums, one museum which is dedicated to community, Karaim community in Trakai, and actually, then if we talk about local history museums, yeah, so this is the most popular type of the museums in the region. And these museums, they combine elements of local history and ethnography. And why it is like this, from where it comes, yes, these features of local history and ethnography, actually, I will not talk about. So I think that this will be very interesting for the readers to read, yes, from where it comes, yes, from which what traditions or the representation, yes, of local history and ethnography, why it is like this. Yes, it comes from the pre-war the period and post-war period. Yeah, so actually, and you know, these local history museums, they operate within, you know, cultural policy framework, yes, that tends to favor an ethno-linguistic concept. Of course, ethno-linguistic concept of Lithuanian identity, which can also marginalize the history of Polish-speaking residents and other minorities, other minority, you know, communities. If to talk about the exhibitions or the local history museums, so the exhibition center a nostalgic vision of the past, showcasing like traditional crafts, traditional furniture, textiles, some, you know, agricultural tools, and some, you know, rituals, representations of some, you know, rituals. What is also very interesting, that difficult past or some, you know, difficult topics or, you know, politically, you know, charged topics, again, as already Violeta mentioned, such, you know, as the Holocaust, Soviet deportations, collectivization, yes, forced migration, they are excluded from the exhibitions, as usually. Yeah, so, and then if to talk about briefly about memorial museums, so often, you know, these memorial museums, they are established in the homes and locations associated with some, you know, prominent or known, you know, figures, some personalities or the district, yes, it articulates regional and cultural identities. But on another hand, yes, it also, you know, presents idealized view of memory. And, you know, because of this, it also lacks, you know, some kind of critical reflection. Yeah? So, and then, you know, if to talk about school museums, so I would like also to mention that school museums, they spread around the Vilnius region. Maintained, if to go a bit more into the details, so these museums, they are, you know, maintained by enthusiasts, as usually by one, you know, person, by the teacher of the school. Yes, also with the minimal support, sometimes no, you know, even, you know, support, and plays an important role in fostering students' pride in the local heritage. Also, very, you know, similar as memorial museums, such, you know, museums, school museums, they have also tendency not really to talk about or not to represent, you know, these challenging topics, difficult past, yes, or let's say the Holocaust, or Soviet, you know, again, Soviet deportations, yes, let's say. You can find, you know, some information, let's say, about the Holocaust, yes, but it is also represented from this, you know, so-called safe point of view. Yes, if there is something about Jewish community, about their life, about their extermination, so for example, the collaboration topic is excluded. Yeah, so there are representations that it was done by the Nazis. Yeah, or for example, if to talk about Soviet deportations. Yeah, so also it's not really on the panel, yeah, on the exhibition, but, you know, for example, somewhere aside, or if you know, the visitor asks, yeah, so the curator or the museum can, you know, show, for example, the list of the deported people from the area. Yes, but just, you know, you have to ask for something like this. And one more, you know, also feature about school museums. Yes, it brings like this kind of concern about long-term survival. Yes, what is going to be the such, you know, museums if it is run by one person? So, for example, if the curator of the school museum will not be able anymore to curate the exhibition, the museum, so who will take after? Yeah, so there is a very big risk that all these stories, yes, all these stories, they may, you know, disappear together with the curator of the museum. And also another thing what unites all these museums, so actually there is a very big variety of items, representation of different kind of items, but lack of personal stories. Yes, all these stories, they are kept in the head of the curator of the museum. But for example, if the visitors, they come and there is no curator, there are no guide, so it's very difficult to also to understand the general content. And so I think that's it, and I really recommend all the today's participants really to read this article and to know more about the museums that we described in the article.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. First of all, it's great to see many of you here. Thank you for coming. My name is Ignė. I was the junior researcher on this project. Thank you, Violeta, for the project, and thank you, Dovilė, for the opportunity to write this article. So I will present the oldest museum in the region, basically working since the interwar period and located in one of the district centers, Švenčionys. I'm coming to talk about a museum called the Nalšia Museum. First, the town of Švenčionys has a long and complicated history dating back to the 13th century. Although Lithuanians now make up the majority of the population, about 50%, Jews, Tatars, Russians, and Poles have lived here for many centuries. The town's history is marked by such dramatic events as the 1863 uprising, the Polish occupation in the interwar period, the establishment of a Jewish ghetto during the Holocaust, and in the post-war period, partisan resistance and mass deportations. It's clear that such a rich history provides an opportunity to tell a fascinating story. And on the slide, you can see information about the museum itself. The Nalšia Museum is the largest and oldest museum in the Vilnius region. The museum operated for several years during the interwar period and was reestablished after the war and has been in operation ever since. The museum holds an impressive collection of over 62,000 artifacts related to archaeology, regional history, and ethnography. Our first impression after visiting the museum and speaking with the staff is that the Nalšia Museum is a classic example of kraštotyra museum. The museum carries out traditional activities, excursions, educational programs, exhibitions, conferences, and events. However, according to the staff, the museum communicates with schools, the disabled community, the Jewish community, the town's all-believer community, and local people even volunteer at the museum. In a notable step toward modernization, it is one of the few museums in the region that has integrated English into its exhibits and making it accessible to foreign visitors. Despite these strengths, the museum struggles with its primary function, storytelling. The main exhibition, largely unchanged since its creation 26 years ago, lacks a clear and compelling narrative. It displays many interesting objects, but they are not connected into a single story that would help visitors understand the city's rich, multicultural, and sometimes tragic history. It's worth noting that the museum also doesn't tell the story of its own past, how it survived and preserved its collections through different political regimes. Because of this, it feels like a classic institution. A place where visitors mostly observe objects rather than actively engaged with them or reflect on their meaning. However, there are reasons to be hopeful. With a new management team and planned renovations, the museum has the chance to move beyond simply displaying objects and create a clearer, more engaging story about the complex history of Švenčionys. And that's all. Thank you. And I think, Rūta, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And I will not repeat all of the thank yous that my colleagues already said, but I completely second them. And I'm also very happy that I can see that some of our research participants have actually joined the webinar, which is really, really great. And I would also like to thank our research participants without whom all of this research would not have been possible. So thank you very much. And I'll talk a little bit about the exposition hall in the town of Eišiškės. And this case offers a point in perspective on the challenges of memory in the Vilnius region. Eišiškės has a long multi-ethnic past, but its heritage is marked by profound rupture and dispersal, particularly concerning the once vibrant Jewish community, which was annihilated during the Holocaust. On a global stage, the memory of Jewish Eišiškės is powerfully preserved at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. Its permanent exhibition features the Tower of Faces, an installation filled with over 1,000 photographs of Jewish residents of Eišiškės taken between 1890 and 1941. And in the upper right corner, left corner of the slide, you can see the Tower of Faces. And the Tower of Faces powerfully memorializes Eišiškės, and it is but one component of a much broader archival constellation preserving the memory of Lithuanian Jewry from the entire Vilnius region. And as you'll read in our article, we go a little bit more into detail about these other initiatives. And these initiatives represent a different yet equally vital form of dispersed heritage rooted in the lived experience of the émigré communities. However, on the local level, the work of memory is far more difficult and tentative. This institution, the Exposition Hall in Eišiškės, faces the immense challenge of reassembling material heritage that has been almost entirely destroyed or scattered. It must also navigate the complexities of representing a traumatic past to a contemporary local community whose own memories may be shaped by different narratives, experiences, or silences. And as Neringa rightly pointed out, even in the case of Eišiškės, there are the histories of some communities, for example, the Roma community in Eišiškės, which was very, very sizable. So these memories, these stories are sometimes very fragmented or left out and not represented. And so the rich diasporic archival presence on the global stage offers a profound opportunity for this local museum in Eišiškės and others like it across the Vilnius region. A strategy of international collaboration with these sites of memory, not only Jewish archives, but also Polish cultural and heritage institutions and others, could provide a critical pathway for the maturation of Lithuanian local history museums and could help them position themselves as contact zones where current residents and the descendants of the diaspora could engage in the co-creation of a more complex, multivocal, and inclusive public history. And finally, moving on to our final case study, I'll give the floor back to the head of our research, Violeta, please.
Yes, so this is a very fascinating case as well. So Visaginas is the youngest town in Lithuania, and it was founded in 1974, and it was meant to house workers of the Ignalina power plant. So this is very much the Soviet project, of the centralized planning, and so the experts, the engineers, the most advanced people at the time were basically recruited from different parts of the USSR to go there and work as just work as the staff in different capacities running this power plant. Interestingly enough, it was named after Antanas Sniečkus. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this name. You know who Antanas Sniečkus was. It's he himself is already kind of a symbol of a complicated past. He was the first secretary of the Lithuanian Communist Party, the longest serving secretary in the former USSR, and if I'm not mistaken, in the entire Soviet bloc. Maybe someone was in service longer than him, but he is certainly one of the longest. He was in power for 33 years. And he died in 1974, and as you see, in 1975 is an official kind of founding date of this town, and it was called after Sniečkus. So now, how is one to represent the past of this particular town? I'm not going to go into great depth. This particular place went through many transformations afterwards, as you know, with Ignalina power plant, almost entire, it's one segment is still working, but then anyways, many residents moved out, and this part was kind of left out, to whatever image people were having in their minds for the future, right? So in any case, in 2024, a new museum was opened in a school building to represent the history of the city. And so we, as the team, we went there to see what this museum looks like. And what is interesting, what we found quite interesting was that it is a relatively quite modern space. It's a nice space. It offers room for conferences and events, temporary traveling, exhibitions, also focuses on town's atomic identity, and also exceptionally diverse populations. But it also tries to really kind of engage with the community. One can see a lot of objects left there by the people who lived there in Visaginas, former Sniečkus. So old phones, different old gadgets and devices, radios, and pieces of furniture, and so on. So there is an attempt to engage with the community. There's also a very interesting exhibition by one of the residents of Visaginas, who lived there his entire life and loved photography, and was kind of photographing the everyday of this particular town. But what is remarkable is that this fragmentation and discomfort with this complicated past is actually starkly present. So, for example, when there is one segment which tells the history of Visaginas, former Sniečkus, it does not say a word basically about what is the Sniečkus? Who is the Sniečkus? One reads one reads that usually in Lithuania, objects are named after rivers or lakes or other kind of whatever important segments of particular landscape. So I think high school kids who go there probably would think, aha, maybe Sniečkus is a river or a lake that dried up or something like that. It also does not tell this history of migration, the in-migration, people who actually arrived in this particular town. So in these everyday life representations, even taken by a particular person, particular resident, so kind of bottom-up story, one can see that there are these silences and omissions. And this is something that it's obvious that this is a very serious challenge to this day, and scholars, curators, and so on still really struggling with it. Now, I want to leave space for the questions, but I will just say that actually, this applies even to the biography of Antanas Sniečkus and research on that. I have to point out that recently, a book, I think last year, a monograph was published about Antanas Sniečkus by a historian from younger generation, Marius Amužis, and that's, I think, only a second biography of Sniečkus during the period of independent Lithuania. So obviously, scholars, researchers are hesitant to tackle these issues. But then it's complex for the museums and for their representation of the past in museums like Visagino City Museum, because as we all agreed, although the efforts of people to engage with the community and so on are admirable, but when one leaves the museum, there are more questions than answers. Nevertheless, and we can go to the conclusions now, very quickly. So in spite of these challenges, that it was just like a very fleeting overview, you really you should go and read the article I recommend, and even better, you should visit this area. Take rent a car when you're in Lithuania and just simply travel around, and especially if you look into the historical legacy of this part of Lithuania. It's remarkable. It's remarkably interesting and very much still, kind of submerged, not discovered. In any case, to conclusions. So one can see that these traditional kraštotyra museums, local history museums, still a predominant form, but there is an attempt to really move beyond that and to reflect the region's full diversity. Also, one can see the shift in that there is an increased experimentation with the new forms of participatory practices and community-driven co-creation. So one has a lot of objects, things, photos that people bring and share, and then, one can do a lot with that. Of course, we did not focus on that very much, but there is a persistent kind of problems with funding, persistent hurdles in funding, also the lack of professional expertise for different reasons. This is a separate topic. This is not to say that people who are enthusiastic and are working hard and do a lot in some of these museums, it's just they do remarkable work, but there is a lack of integration in general and kind of a wider network of experts, I would say, and even lack of institutional vision sometimes. And also basically in all of these museums, one can see these fragmented narratives. Basically discomfort covering certain parts of history, significant silences surrounding, Soviet minority histories, other histories, even the history of collectivization, and so on. And we believe that giving this region more visibility, focusing more on research and so on, and also a kind of bringing it to, presenting it in platforms where scholars who deal with other parts of kind of quote unquote border areas, these borderline regions. I meant like Silesia, or we had team members who come from Rijeka in Croatia. Also a very interesting story with the very multi-ethnic community, multiple changes of hands and so on, or even Trieste or elsewhere. This really helps us to understand how to deal with this legacy and how to involve the public better, and how to basically overcome the difficult past, legacy of difficult past in this part of Lithuania. Sorry, I hope I did not go over time too much. And
thank you. Thank you so much to the entire team for this fascinating presentation. I mean, it really, I think, will inspire many people to read your article in Lituanus. And I'm very, very happy that we were able to hear from you.
And
so,
Dovilė, if I may, just very quickly,
sure.
If anyone here who speaks Lithuanian very well, or is Lithuanian, or is fluent in Lithuanian, the research data that we produced, the transcripts of interviews with these practitioners from all of these towns and also many others, is open access actually on the Midas platform, MIDAS. So if you visit Midas and just type in Europass in the search bar, you'll find the data if you're interested. That's
an important note. And the article, once again, will be available open access on Lituanus website, which is lituanus.org, shortly. So we have some questions. We have a little bit of time for several questions. So if you have a question, please start speaking or raise your hand. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I have a question. I don't know how to raise my hand in this program.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, this is for all of the presenters. I'm curious, how did the sources of funding for these museums affect what is on display, what sort of text there is in these museums? And the reason I'm asking this question is because 8 years ago, I was the project manager for the creation of a traveling exhibit about friendship between Lithuania and the United States over the past century. And the source of funding for that exhibit was the U.S. Embassy in Vilnius. So they basically had to approve all of the text and images that were used in the exhibit. And to my surprise, they would not approve the text that we produced for the recognition of Lithuania's independence after World War I. And eventually that was written by a public relations person at the embassy, which was nonsense. It was just garbage. So what did you learn from, visiting these museums and talking to museum staff about how the sources of funding for these museums have influenced what's on display and what sort of text they include?
Yeah, if we could actually gather all of the questions, because we do have a limited time left. So I saw Vilana Pilinkaitė-Sotirovič had a question.
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. I read the article and I also enjoyed listening to you. And my question, although you mentioned already several times that there are many issues that are silenced and not talked about and so forth. So memory is also very much selected, what to remember and what not to remember. And I just wonder, during your research, I mean, how those creators were telling also this power dynamics, what they want to present, or maybe they wanted to present more, but what it is hidden in their stories and why it is hidden. I mean that because curators also have certain vision, certain knowledge, and they have also their kind of power, and also they do not have power sometimes to do this. So what was more specific? What really they what powers dynamics are that, you know, they chose specific topics to present. And the other very short, I mean that because in this like silencing discourse, I think it's not sometimes, you know, very like historical phenomenon like silence, or historical events are silence. But for example, from the gender perspective, I think that a lot of things are also silenced, as you know, not important because ethnicities maybe is some important. So there is kind of also power dynamics in this. So it will be interesting to hear this.
Yeah, thank you so much,
Sorry.
Dovana. And then we have Svaya and Brian, and then we'll hear from the participants.
Yeah, my question is, what do the museums cost? Are they free? What do they charge if you're going to go visit them?
And Svaya, please.
Quick question. Lituanus, what is the circulation presently, and is it an international readership? And Brian, my museum is free. It's in Alaska. It's a nonprofit.
Right, and thank you to Svaya also for a fascinating essay, which is also published in the same issue. Thank you so much. And Lituanus, I'll briefly mention that right now it has 1,000 copies circulation, and it's international. It goes all over the world. So
Dovilė, I'm sorry, sorry to interrupt. There is one more question. There are several questions in the chat.
In the chat box. So perhaps we can start answering the questions that we have, and then time permitting, we'll take the chat questions too.
If I may, I can actually jump in with regard to the first question, because it's very interesting and it's very relevant, and it's something we reflected on quite a lot. And it was kind of it was always in the back of our minds while we were doing the research, because, you know, it's a very delicate environment, the Vilnius region, and what the approaches there are very diverse. But one thing is very common throughout all of these museums, maybe except Nalshe Museum, because it's kind of more institutionalized, is that it's very, the people who work there in terms of access to expertise and to state-of-the-art and to innovations in museology are more isolated from kind of centers of research and knowledge in Lithuania. And then, you know, it creates a sort of interesting dynamic where we always were thinking, okay, if we ask them about, like, directly what are the influences, does, for example, the municipal government have some influence? Well, oftentimes the usual reply you would get, of course not. And to be honest with you, I think because all of these, there are no private museums that we visited. They were all kind of operated by the municipal governments. So to be honest, I think to a large degree that is true. I don't think that the the funding authority of these museums, the municipal government, has very much influence on the content of these museums, because they also operate kind of as community centers. But there were these interesting situations. For example, in one museum, I won't tell directly which one that was, but we had a situation where we agreed with the museum that we're going to come visit, talk to them, and then we come to the museum and there's a person from the municipal government ready to talk to us about the exposition in the museum, which is a bit of a interesting dynamic. So it's very, very, in a way, it's quite unexpected. But I wouldn't, at least my take is that I didn't at least notice something that would really, that where I could see that this is strange, or that the government has influence, for example, or approved, or as in your case, you explained, or disapproved some content, because the content is very, very diverse. And as Violeta and my colleagues noted, it's quite fragmented. It doesn't have like one consistent narrative. So I just don't want to take any more of time for myself. I hope I at least managed to answer this question in part. Maybe somebody wants to add something.
Rūta, maybe you could answer regarding the tickets, because you guys went to all of these museums. So what does it cost to get there?
Oh, it really varies. generally, the more institutionalized a museum is, the more expensive, and they're not expensive. It's like €5, €7 max. That was, I think, in Trakai, but because the Kerite Museum in Trakai is part of one of the biggest museums and one of the most popular museums of the Trakai Island Castle. But generally, they're €2 to €3. And I don't think, Ignė, maybe you can correct me, I don't think we've encountered museums where they were for free. All of them have tickets, but they're very, very cheap. Yeah.
Yes, maybe
Right, so
I
there
will
was-
just, add some insights from the visits to the school museum. So all school museums, they are for free.
Mhm. Thank you so much. So there was also a question about silences from Vilana, and I think here's a related question from Usha: how the state's political elite interests influence the museum resources functioning, especially when complex history is memorialized. So maybe you could address both of those questions together.
Maybe I could just say a few words and then I will give the floor to our team of young researchers. So about this, Charlie's question, and in general about this power dynamics, I think it's quite relevant that the chief curators or the heads of some of these museums, they are not local, from what I understand. My team members could correct me, but I think they're from elsewhere, not from the area. And so in some cases, at least what I saw in the previous exposition of one of these museums, Nalshe Museum, there is this standard kind of telling of the history of Lithuanian ethnicity, if you will, history of the state, like a very standard thing, without much attention, if you will, or much sensitivity for the local experience. But you see, this local experience, interestingly enough, comes through the artifacts that most likely are brought by the local people. Somehow they end up in this museum, and it's a pretty random assemblage of things. Like, for example, you could see the glasses of a person that supposedly was murdered during the Holocaust. There is no history attached to this particular artifact, but you see glasses, some personal items. Then elsewhere you see the photos that from the very interesting historical photos from the area. I'm sorry, is this my echo or someone just?
No, that was something else.
Basically, someone. So we asked, what are these interesting photos are, because there is not enough description. They say, well, they were discovered in a dilapidated house. Basically, the house was destroyed, and someone found a bunch of really interesting photos and just simply brought it to the museum. And someone decided to display these photos that shows kind of a completely different image of this particular locale, but without much description. So there is a lot of randomness, and that is interesting in itself. It's just, it in itself is kind of signals this fragmentation, but also the lack of centralization, if you will. Someone like really kind of ordering this. No one gives much attention, I suppose. I don't know, unless you have the expression, maybe my colleagues would want to.
Right, so Rūta has her hand up. So.
Yes, I finally found how to put my hand up on Zoom. I managed that. But yeah, so I just wanted to add completely to what Violeta said, and it's also with the question about silences, right? It's very, again, I would say it's like another new topic for another research project, because there's so much there. It's very, very delicate, and it's very intricate, the relationship, because in terms of the narrative, I don't think it's And I'm always a bit like, whenever we use either left out or not represented or ignored, these are not entirely correct terms because they kind of imply that there is an intention to not represent. But oftentimes, in some cases, maybe we could say that about some of these museums, but in many cases, these are just very, as Neringa explained, very enthusiastic people who might not themselves be historians, who just have these objects and they're trying to do a museum the best way they can. And the result is very interesting. However, I would say that also, and maybe Neringa could add to that, that also depends, at least to some extent, on the type of museum, because I've noticed this trend in school museums where school teachers responsible for these museums would be, for example, have a section in their museum about the Holocaust or about the Jewish community of their town, in which the school is, but they wouldn't talk about like mass, murder sites in their town, right, during the Holocaust. And when we would ask them about them, they'd be like, well, but it's children, so let's keep it more like we don't talk about these very negative things and so on. So that depends, that can also depend on the museum type as well. But it's very it's hard to say whether there's very like real intentionality there. As I said, it's a very broad topic. Yeah.
Just for a second, if I'm allowed to add to that, it's quite remarkable. I already mentioned it before, to what degree this area is still very much kind of terra incognita. And I think indirectly, this is very much reflected in what we see in the museums. Just recently, about 10 days ago, at the Lithuanian Institute of History, a very interesting diary by a Lithuanian teacher who worked in different small towns and villages in this area, Višniauskaitė area. It was discovered by my colleague Vitalijus Stravinsky in the archive and then prepared for publication. And so there was a presentation of this remarkable diary, which starts right during the interwar period, before the war. And then, also he describes World War II, then he's deported after World War II. And then eventually from his diaries and everything, he puts this together. And then, as I said, it was published recently. So professional historians pointed out that this is probably the first source like this about the experience, kind of like on the ground experience through the eyes of a person, a just high school teacher, about the changes and the shifts of hand and the hands and the tensions in this area. We really, it's a very scattered story. As Rūta pointed out, some of it you can find in Washington at the Holocaust Museum, some of it you can find in family archives in Poland, elsewhere. So it's really, in that respect, it's very much a transnational, story, and to make this, to assemble this and put it, to represent it to the visitors, it's a really challenging task. So and I think the museums reflect that, and we have a great admiration to people who are really struggling to do that.
So we are running a little bit over time, so let's just try to wrap it up with two questions. One question was, who goes to these museums? Do we know any demographic information on attendees? And the other question was about perhaps your future presentations, and maybe your respondents will create their own informal network, perhaps about the next steps in the project.
Yes, I can take both of these questions, and my colleagues perhaps will add. In terms of the visitors, it's mostly, in almost all cases, children and members of the towns, residents of the towns, who are usually not necessarily always elderly, but at least middle-aged or elderly, and that is very simple kind of sociological reason. a lot of young people, they move out of these towns when they go on to study to Vilnius or Kaunas or abroad. And usually they don't really go back to these towns unless they're like middle-aged already, which was sometimes the case with these administrators in the museums, that they were kind of raised in these towns or were born there. They went to study, have fun somewhere else, and they would come back to these towns later. So this is mostly kind of the type of visitor of these local museums, but the bigger museums also have international visitors. And I think especially like around 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, they would have more visitors from abroad, diaspora and particularly also people from the bordering countries such as Poland and Belarus. But I would say that has kind of these numbers of international visitors have decreased in more recent years, which I think is due to many, many different reasons. Ignė, please.
I want to add that it's related with financial challenges and communication. Actually, these are very, very little known museums in Lithuania, and we also have struggled and had a hard time finding them. And it's very, very complicated issue, but we have no time to talk about it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and to just end with the question about our presentations and this research. So this was kind of a new thing for us because we were constantly like presenting the development of the research throughout this Europass project. When we started, like midway, I don't know, I maybe presented the research like 5 times in different conferences, including the MSCA Memory Studies Association conference, and it was always like with new updates, kind of updating everyone about the status of this research and where we're going, and preliminary conclusions and conclusions now. For the future, hopefully this can turn into a bigger niche of research. I am myself doing a PhD. I recently started a PhD in very, very, with a very strong relation, almost a continuation of this research and this project. So hopefully we can kind of create a platform for research into memory practices and public history practices in these borderland regions. So I think that's it from me. Maybe my colleagues would like to add something, but thank you very much, and thank you very much for all of your kind words in the chat.
Yeah, indeed, thank you so much to those who mentioned in the chat how impressive they were with the project and your presentations, and definitely we're very, very grateful to everybody who could join us on this Friday night in Lithuania or afternoon in United States, Eastern States. So thank you once again, everybody, and please read Lituanus, please subscribe to Lituanus, and hopefully we will be able to continue our webinars in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure to be with you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Have a good night. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Oh, good day.
Bye.
You elsewhere.
Ai, gerai, galim tada išeiti. Tai ačiū labai.
Ačiū Jums. Tai tikėsimės bus įrašas ir tada mes toliau dalinsimės įrašu.
Gerai, tai aš tada, kai turėsiu pirmadienį, jau šiandien turėsiu, bet atsiųsiu jau pirmadienį Jums tada įrašą ir galime pasidalinti. Aš galvoju, mes net Europastą gal galėtume. Tai...
Galėtumėt pasidalinti Europastą, būtų
gerai. Tai susirašysim tada. Gražios dienos ir gražaus savaitgalio. Ačiū viso.
Viso.